Welcome back to another episode of the Year of Plenty podcast, the show to help you get closer to your food source and learn the skills to make every year a year of plenty. We are all about building more resilient humans through food here, and I'm pumped to have you along for the ride. Now, today's episode is part 2 of our conversation with James Mann, aka Spicebush Woodcraft. We had James on for part 1. That was the previous episode on the podcast here, all about hickory nut foraging. So if you haven't checked that one out, please do. Just a quick background on James. He's a foraging educator, homesteader, and chef, and he's got a ton of knowledge when it comes to many different foraged wild edible plants and mushrooms. And he also has some great insights on homesteading because he has a 1 acre homestead, which is where he built that DIY thermal greenhouse. And that is what part 2 of our conversation with him is all about. So today's episode is all about his thermal greenhouse, which he actually uses to grow vegetables and fruits during the colder months of the year. All right, that's it for the intro. Get ready to learn all about a thermal greenhouse build from James. All right, so now we want to pivot a bit into your thermal greenhouse because I've read about thermal greenhouses in the past. I've heard some people on X recommend to me that I get one because we live in Montana and I'd love to grow avocado trees. So I still have big hopes that maybe a thermal greenhouse is the answer.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'll kind of give you the brief overview. So 3 years ago, I lived in a little bit outside of Columbus, Ohio, and my girlfriend moved in with me, and my landlord was going to sell the house that I was living in, so we had to find something else, and we were wanting to buy something, and the market was crazy and all that stuff, but one of her friends gave her a tip on this house in South Columbus, which is typically like a kind of a rougher area. But when we went and saw the house, it was just beautiful, and it had this 1 acre parcel. It was like a 3/4 acre parcel that's attached to the house in the backyard, and it's in an area that is just we're kind of surrounded by old people who have owned their homes for a very long time. So pretty nice, quiet neighborhood overall. But it had this beautiful backyard and riparian area, and basically most of our yard is a floodplain that can't be built on. So the area that we can build on, right before we moved, I watched this video on YouTube. It was this old guy, 80-year-old guy. His name was Russ Finch, and he has the greenhouse in the snow in Nebraska. And his uses true geothermal. So he has corrugated pipe that runs in the ground. His greenhouse is dug in 4 foot into the ground, just like mine. But he has corrugated pipe that runs 8 feet underground and huge loops around his yard. And what it does is a fan will kick on and it'll push air through these tubes. And by the time that it gets back around to the greenhouse, that air is about 60 degrees. So he's using the radiant heat from the ground. Once you get below the frost line, the ground is a more stable temperature. Typically, depending on where you are, it could be between 50 and 60 degrees. And depending on where you are, depends on how deep it is, how deep the frost line is. Here, our frost line is 3 feet. So we dug our greenhouse about 4.5 feet down. But yeah, anyway, there was a perfect place for us in front of our garage to put this pit. And so when we moved in, it's funny. There used to be an old settling tank right in front of the pit, and from like the 1900s. I mean, it was just a brick cylinder that went down in the ground and almost looked like a well. I thought we found a well or something, but turned out to be a settling tank. So half the pit was kind of dug for us, which was awesome. But the other half was we hand dug this pit. By the way, I was too stubborn to get an excavator. I was like, oh, it won't be that bad, but it is that bad. Get an excavator. Don't hand dig it. There was a stump on the other half of it, and I spent about 2 months like chopping this stump out with an axe, and I burned it twice, trying to get rid of it. And eventually, I finally found the bottom of it, and I chopped it out of there and rolled it out of there like what is it, Sisyphus or whatever, like rolling the stone up. you know, rolling this stump out. I still have it as a memorial outside of the pit, as well as the shovel I used to dig it with. Because on the very last post hole, I broke the shovel. But
Oh, yeah.
but anyway, just to get to the point, the greenhouse that I have is built. It's basically a 4 foot deep pit that I covered with a greenhouse. So it's built like pole barn style. So I have 4x4 posts that serve as the frame basically, that I concreted in the ground, down in the bottom of the pit. And then I kind of built berms around the side, and then I put recycled doors and windows on every side, and then on the top is like a polycarbonate double walled roof. And most of the windows that I recycled are double walled as well, which is um, helps with insulation. It doesn't help a ton, but I don't. I use a little bit of a mixture between geothermal and passive solar. So what passive solar is it's basically I'm taking the sun's energy and I'm storing it in thermal batteries, which my thermal battery is a cob structure that I built this past winter that has it's like a rocket stove powered thermal mass. So
Mm,
basically, it's a rocket stove, which is a J-shaped stove that it basically super it basically feeds itself oxygen from the shape of the stove and through something called a thermosiphon, which is a little bit hard to explain without a visual. But there's a 55-gallon drum on top of the actual chimney of the rocket stove itself. So if you imagine a J, the longer end of the vertical J, there'd be a barrel over top of that, and the chimney is highly insulated. And so as it feeds itself this fire, it feeds itself oxygen. The fire gets superheated and hotter than any fire. It's like a forge, basically. Thousands of degrees, and it goes up through the chimney, and the barrel that's on the outside of it, the air on the outside of the barrel is colder than the air inside of the barrel, and so it actually lifts it up through the barrel, and then it goes down through a series of piping that is covered in cob, which is a mixture of clay, sand, and straw, to basically make like a bench almost. And so it actually, a typical wood stove, you lose a lot of the heat out of the chimney. I capture a lot of the heat in the cob itself. And so in the wintertime, I use the stove to capture the heat. And in the summertime, I use the angle of the sun to kind of hit the thermal mass and to keep it charged during the summertime. So I don't know if all that made sense. It's kind of hard to show it without a visual.
No, it did.
Um, but those are kind of the two ways that my greenhouse works. So I get the heat from the ground, which is 4 foot down, but that only helps me a little bit. It helps me stay about at freezing in the middle of winter. But I need more than that because I grow citrus in there all winter long. And so I use the rocket stove to bump me up higher than freezing so that the
mm,
plants can actually thrive and not just barely survive.
Right.
right. How long did it take start to finish to build your greenhouse?
I mean, it's still a work in progress. It's kind of like an experiment, so I'm kind of always improving it. But initially, the V1 greenhouse, it took about probably like a year and a half because it took us like 9 months to dig the pit.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't something we were dedicated on, right? Like, I'm not getting paid to make this greenhouse. So, like, it was kind of something that we worked on. We also had just moved into our house. So, we were working on the greenhouse, the
Mm,
garden, the chicken coop. We were doing all this stuff at once. And so, I kind of was just doing the greenhouse as I had time. And, you dig a lot at first, and then about a few months in, you're like, I can't. Summer starts to get there, and you're like, I am not digging this pit in 95 degree
yeah.
heat. So you take breaks on it. I would take breaks for like a month or whatever, and then get back to it. And
Mm,
once it was dug and I was happy with it, I it was easy to kind of build the frame and stuff around it, and part went relatively quickly. Um,
right.
as as opposed to, because I've been building stuff for a long time, so it wasn't like a huge deal. Also, using doors and windows, you can kind of fill in a lot of space without having to use a lot of framing. And we're my girlfriend and I are both kind of scrappy, so like we like to if we see building materials or something on the side of the road, we pick them up. So we
Mm.
acquired a lot of different types of building materials for free to use. We tried to recycle as much as possible for the greenhouse. Probably from a money standpoint,
Yeah,
it was
what
way
was the
cheaper to do
budget?
it that way.
What was kind of the budget roughly?
I think total we may have spent maybe I would say all in all, including the rocket stove, probably like 3 grand
Okay.
Mm.
That seems
over the course of like 3 years, which is actually like not that bad.
yeah.
But we did a
Yeah.
lot of the work ourselves. Like we dug all the pit by hand for ourselves. We used a lot of recycled materials. Really, the main thing that I bought was the polycarbonate roof because I didn't want to use glass on top because it's so heavy, and also because there's a tree nearby that is toward the end of its life, and so if a branch falls, I would rather it fall on the polycarbonate than a bunch of glass.
And
Yeah.
is the polycarbonate usually what they use for like the greenhouses you buy at the store? Is that similar material?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, this is a double walled like polycarbonate, so you probably see it on some of the nicer greenhouses you'd see. I think the Costco greenhouse uses that same kind of material, but it's pretty lightweight and inexpensive. But I also bought all the framing material, like the 4x4 posts, the concrete, all that stuff. I bought new. I did not recycle that because I wanted to have a nice frame that was going to last. But then the filler 2x4s and all that stuff were kind of scraps that we found. And, I used some
Mm.
actually on one of the sides, I used a bunch of tongue and groove hardwood flooring that I recycled, and I kind of used it for the wall and just get, because it
Nice.
all, it already just like fit together. You know what I mean? So I just kind of fit it together and then nailed it to the greenhouse. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of different things. The front windows are from my grandpa's old dental office, and some of them I got. This guy was just had them on the side of the road. He said they were from like a multi-million-dollar house that he helped demo, and he was trying to get rid of them. So I got them for free. Um, so yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff. And last year I kind of, last year was kind of like when the greenhouse kind of blew up on like my social media, and it was all about this journey. I basically was like, hey, every year I take my citrus inside. I have a Meyer lemon, a lime, and a now I have a calamandrin. Um, but I always take them inside for the winter, and they almost die basically in the
Yeah.
house. And then they
Mm.
spend all year outside reviving, and then they never actually produce very much fruit, if any fruit, because they're in this basically live and die cycle. So I was like, you know what? This year I'm going to keep them in the greenhouse all year long, and even if it's getting dicey out there, I'm going to keep them in there. If they die, they die. And
Right.
so that kind of forced me to be a lot more uh, creative, and that's when I got the idea for the or I didn't have the idea for it. It was an obscure idea that can only find on like weird homesteading forums, but the rocket powered thermal mass, which is actually a more efficient way to heat like a house too, because instead of heating a whole room when you're only in one part of it, you're actually heating the thing that you're sitting on. So a lot of people in homes like off grid homesteads will use this rocket powered thermal mass to heat like a giant bench.
Oh yeah.
And
Huh.
so it's like conductive heat on your where you're sitting, and so you're heating yourself, and the area right immediately around you is warm. But if you went to the other side of the room, it would be cold, right? But that's a more efficient way than trying to heat our entire homes that we're actually not in. You know what I mean?
Right. So
And with
Yeah.
this rocket stove, I can use less wood and get more output thermally out of it. So it's a very efficient stove. It burns so hot that it burns off any of the bad stuff. I can't remember what it's called. That builds up in fireplaces and chimneys. It
Oh, the soot?
Yeah, the soot. I can't remember what it's called. It's called something specific, but yeah, the soot basically. So it burns so hot with the forced air that's basically forcing through it. And in the middle of winter, I could feel the cold air getting drawn into the greenhouse through the stove. So that's something I got to address as well. But
Mm.
it's super efficient and it feeds itself. So I can just put a stack of wood in the little burn chamber, and it'll burn for like a couple hours just
okay.
with like some basically kindling.
That's a question we had. Yeah. How often do you have to really keep that fire stoked during the winter. But it sounds like it's
Well,
very
that's the beauty of it, right? Because I can get it hot and I can charge the thermal battery and then I can let it coast off the residual heat for at least a day,
okay.
maybe two, depending on how cold it is.
That's pretty nice. So it's like it sounds like it's more of a backup for you right now because you said up to 0.
I only use it really in emergency situations, like when it's below zero outside. If it's in the 20s or below, up to below zero, like my citrus survived a week where it was like -20, like almost every single day for a week straight.
All right.
Whoa.
And that's when I burned the rocket stove like every day. But I didn't burn it at night. So I would go to bed at like 9 o'clock and it would have to just like coast off the residual all night long.
So
I'm sure that was stressful the first few times.
It was, I mean, at the end of the day, like I don't want to lose my citrus trees, but I'm also not going to stay up all night stoking a fire to save them. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So
Yeah.
it was kind of like live or die, but they lived. There was only a couple times where the greenhouse actually got below freezing, and it was only for a very, very short time. And that was because I had tons of drafts that I didn't really realize I had. But the stove actually showed me the drafts because, like I said, it would pull air in from every little space from outside of the greenhouse to feed the stove itself. So it's actually drawing its air through. It's like I wish I had a visual to explain it to you because it's actually a really really cool concept. Same, it's basically a higher class version of a Dakota fire hole, which
well,
is like something that
send us
if you're
some
into bushcraft or anything.
send us some pictures and I can blend them into the video so people can go and see that. That would be cool if
Oh
you
yeah,
could do that.
I'll send you a whole
And
20-page
then
PDF on it.
Oh, no.
just some pictures would be good.
Sweet.
But
Yeah, for sure.
so
More than you asked for.
sounds
Yeah,
like
but with that, I can sit the plants on the bench in the wintertime. And so they get the conductive heat from the bench
right.
with number one, not getting too hot that burns the roots, but two, they can coast off this individual heat. So I'm not actually heating the greenhouse, I'm heating the plants themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
That's fascinating. And it sounds like you could do a bit more work, you said, with the insulation. Like, how have you insulated it so far, if at all? And,
Yeah,
yeah,
so the ground is really the insulation, and I can't, so what I'll do is I'll put up some like greenhouse sheeting over top of the windows just to add another little layer. But the problem I'm having is the berms that I made around the greenhouse, that the berms are basically, there's a gap between the hole and the greenhouse itself, maybe like a foot to a 2 foot gap. And so I had to like build like a platform to connect the two, and then I basically shoveled dirt on top of it. And so I need to figure out a way to get some insulation in that gap, because it seems like the dirt is not doing its job as far as like insulating it enough. So just,
Mhm.
these little things you learn every year and you
right.
kind of, the problem is that in the middle of winter is not the time to handle that. So you kind of just have to grit your teeth and bear it. But over the course of the summer, I'll kind of work on that and build those areas up so that next once wintertime comes, I'll already have the. I built this whole rocket stove in the middle of winter,
Oh
which
my
was like the
God.
dumbest thing to do. It was so hard to do cob work and stone work in the middle of wintertime. But I had to do it to save the plants. So
Mhm.
um,
Do you do you have any kind of beds or anything set up in there, or is everything kinda in pots?
right now, everything's in pots because I've been so turbulent with moving everything and like building new stuff in there. But once I get everything kind of situated exactly where I want it, and also the thing is with this greenhouse is that I have to move things throughout the year because the angle of the roof is really set to catch the winter sun. So
Mm.
the winter sun is lower, and to get a good UV penetration, it has to almost hit at a perpendicular angle at 90 degrees. And so my windows on the roof are a little bit steeper than usual. And so they catch the winter sun and it hits the back of the greenhouse where the bench is. So, in addition to the rocket stove heating that mass, the sun, in its weakened state, even is heating that mass as well. So, at the winter time, all my plants get moved to the back of the greenhouse. And then in the summer, as the sun comes up, it's more shining straight down into the greenhouse because the back of my greenhouse that's not facing the sun does not have windows at all because it doesn't need to, because it doesn't Um, in the summertime, I actually need to try and catch less sun because it being underground makes it a more stable temperature. But when the sun's beating directly down into the middle of it, it does get pretty warm in there during the summer. So I have to keep a fan in the summertime to kind of have ventilation and keep air moving to combat
Mhm.
pests and just it getting too hot in there. Um, but I also have to move the plants more to the front of the greenhouse because the back of the greenhouse actually doesn't really get that much sun.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's just how it is. You don't really fully know how it's going to be until you build it all, right? And then you kind of adjust from
Oh
there.
yeah, especially with something like this. I mean, good luck finding like any like with this and the rocket stove. Like it was kind of a mixture of just like ideas I've seen from other people and my own like creativity and my own like experimentation. Because you're not going to find really a step by step guide on how to do this. There's so many things to consider. Drainage is one. We were blessed with making this. Our backyard is kind of a north facing slope. So a south facing slope would be the most ideal, but we built it in the middle of the slope. So all the water drains down, and the bottom of our greenhouse, we actually hit a bunch of compacted gravel and rock, which was perfect for drainage. Even when we've gotten 3 or 4 inches of rain in one day, the greenhouse has never flooded ever.
Dad,
Okay.
that's
Um,
Yeah, I was gonna ask about
I
that.
actually made a video on Instagram in the middle of that rainstorm. You can barely hear what I'm saying because it's raining so hard. But I was just like, it doesn't flood. Like I'm trying to prove it. Like, you know what I mean? Like I mean, some water like will start to come in when we get really, really strong rainstorms, but nothing that would ever, I mean, it dissipates so quickly. Like it goes right down into the ground, drains. So even if water does kind of come in and infiltrate it a little bit, it's really not that big of a deal. It disappears pretty quick.
do you
But,
sorry,
go ahead.
do you have any water system like where you actually catch rainwater to water your plants
Oh,
inside the
yeah.
greenhouse? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, I do. I have the front gutter of the greenhouse. It funnels water down into a rain barrel that's actually inside of the greenhouse. Um, so that I can water the plants with rainwater inside, so I don't have to have a hose that goes into the greenhouse or anything like that. And for the most part, I actually have trouble keeping it from being too full. And so I have like a master water catchment plan that we're trying to implement. So I want to start since our house is the top of a slope. The greenhouse is halfway down the slope. Then we have an IBC tote that's all the way down the slope. And then we have a duck pond that we just built. And so the master water plan is that to have rain barrels on the house, and their overflow goes down into the greenhouse. And once that overflows, that goes down into the IBC tote. And then once that overflows, it goes and fills up the duck pond. And then we can use all that water in between for watering plants and all that kind of stuff. So
Smart.
Wow.
That's
super
awesome.
fun. Last year, I even tried to build a ram pump. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but that's a
No.
whole other rabbit hole to jump down. A ram pump actually basically exploits a natural phenomenon known as a water hammer effect on pipes. And so you can put it into a creek and it can actually pump water uphill without electricity.
Oh, wow.
Oh, nice. Okay.
I almost got it to work, but our creek just does not have enough slope for it to work. The
Yeah,
so
it's almost like siphoning.
Yeah, it's like basically like if you have these like relief valves. So like when the water pressure builds up, the head pressure builds up as it comes in a normal pipe, it would cause what's called a water hammer, which would actually beat the pipe so hard with that pressure that it would collapse it. But there's two different one-way check valves in this thing that when it does build up that pressure, it is like a perpetual motion machine almost. It releases when it releases the pressure, it opens up another valve which puts a little gulp of water into the front, which over time those gulps build up and then it pumps it uphill. It's amazing.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I worked for my brother for a little bit when I was a kid during the summer, and he was working for a rancher, and they had to go and hand irrigate all of the fields. So you go to the ditch and you take a little piece of PVC pipe, dunk it in, and it's supposed to siphon the water out.
Oh yeah.
And it goes like uphill and then back downhill in this little U-shaped hose. So that's all I can envision right now is like that one little piece of PVC pipe just pumping everything up up the
Oh yeah,
hill.
it's like I mean, and that sounds like a pretty rudimentary version, but I'm
Yeah.
sure there's all different kinds of ways to do it. You know what I mean? It's so
Mhm.
cool when you start to again, like this all comes back to the land. You know what I mean? It all comes back to learning how. I just feel like as a child, I was robbed of any kind of real education on how things actually work. We get these little
Mhm.
like snippets in school where it's like the food chain and this is how the rain cycle works and da da da. But like there's so much more intricacies to what's going on. And I feel like we were robbed and we're trying to like steal some of the information back in a way of how all
Yeah.
this works. And it's, I, for me, it's amazing. Yeah, life is an amazing adventure. And, you know, trying to, when you start to view things from the land's point of view and from how we can work with the land, you just really realize how much of an amazing adventure it is to be alive, you know?
Totally. I love
Mhm.
that.
Definitely.
So to end it real quick, just like in conclusion, because I think you kind of hit on it throughout, but like what are some of the benefits of even having a thermal greenhouse? Like, why would we do it?
Well, for me, the benefits are that I can grow citrus all year long in Ohio. But also the benefits are numerous in the fact that like I can keep house plants out there in the summertime instead of having to keep them in the house where they kind of like don't do well. Um, you know, humidity in the house is always a factor when you have house plants. And like, I don't have a lot of house plants, but there are some that I really enjoy having. And you know, it's a great place to start cuttings and start seeds. I started fig cuttings in there, and the fig cuttings were in there all winter long, and now they have sprouted and they have roots on them, and they can be transplanted around. Um, so there's all kinds of these different little ways. It's great for seedlings in the spring as well. So instead of having to have all of these lights in my basement, I can just germinate the seeds indoors where it's a little bit warmer, and then I can immediately take them out to the greenhouse, and they can live underneath natural sunlight because the natural sunlight, no matter how good your light is, the sun is always better. And so the more time
Mhm.
your seedlings can spend under natural sunlight, the less shock they're going to develop, the faster they're going to grow, and the better they're going to grow because they're going to grow better root systems instead of focusing all their energy on growing the vegetative growth at the beginning.
Right.
Um, so there's a whole lot of benefits for it. You know, I can plant potatoes in there in pots at a earlier in the year than you would put potatoes out in the ground, and I've kind of only just started experimenting with those things. So I do believe I'll be able to grow greens like lettuce and stuff in there all winter long. Now, the sun strength is a factor in some vegetables. So one would think, oh, I can grow tomatoes all year long. And that's not really the case because the sun is just not very strong in the winter. So even if it's warm enough, the sun is not actually strong enough for the plant to produce fruit like it is in the summertime, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's definitely
Mhm.
something to consider. That's something probably a lot of people don't think about because they don't grow stuff in the winter. You know, I
Yeah, I,
I
you know,
had
they
never
don't, and
considered that.
well, that's the reason why we have different styles of onions that we grow, like short day, long day, midday, because the sun, in my opinion, the sun strength in the sun, where the sun is in the sky, is actually more important than temperature. Um, because plants will get grumpy if they get too cold, but if the sun is not strong enough, that plant will never actually produce anything that you want it to produce. Right now, lettuce is different because lettuce is just it just needs to produce leaves, and that's all well and good. But when you're talking about fruiting plants, especially warm weather fruiting plants, there's just not enough sun. And even if they do produce fruit, it's not going to be very good. Um, it's not going to have the same sweetness and the same thing. The
Right.
sun is just such a huge factor in
Yeah,
winter growing that I think a lot of people just don't consider very much.
totally.
Right.
So you think I can grow an avocado tree if I built one of these greenhouses or what?
That I mean, you can try. Are you ever going to get avocados? I don't know. I don't know how much. I don't know what the sun is like where you guys are, or like how, how your growing season is. Like, how long is your growing season? Would
Very
you say?
short. I
Not
mean,
very long.
like we said,
Very short. Then
we just had snow, so
ah,
usually it's like, I mean, snow.
It snows sometimes up till July.
Well, that's rare, I would say, but
I don't
At
know.
least from
If I were you, well, the sun is still well. It's a little bit different for you guys because I'm sure you're at some sort of altitude, right?
yeah, about
Mhm.
So the
five
snow doesn't
thousand.
necessarily play as much of a factor. But I would say that you should start with citrus if you were going to do that. Citrus is a little bit more forgiving, and go ahead, go all out, get an avocado tree. Screw it, who cares? Just grow it. And but the problem is again, it's just all about where the sun is and how long. How long does the sun how long is the sun in a certain part of the sky? Avocados are tough. They need a very long growing season.
Yeah,
And so you could try and extend it and see what you can get. I would say you'd probably have an easier time with something like citrus, but who knows? There are guys that have taken Russ Finch's design, added a few more tweaks, and they're growing pineapples in places like Nebraska.
yeah, I've heard of this stuff
Now,
happening.
pineapples and mangoes and bananas, that's the tippy top. Like if you can get dialed in to the point where you can create pineapples, then you can grow anything because pineapples require the most heat and sun of anything.
Mm.
Same with mangoes. And so if you can grow pineapples, you can grow anything else underneath the sun. Um, and only a few guys have ever been able to do that. I don't really have an interest in that personally, because that's a whole. I mean, you get too many hobbies at some point.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I'd
Yeah,
rather.
I'm at that point where it's like I can't learn anything else.
Yeah,
Right now.
I'd rather build my wild gardens through wild tending over the years. You can always get pineapples from the store, and someone who can grow
Oh
them
yeah,
much easier. But with avocados, it's just
exactly.
I'm such an avid avocado eater, and I just really don't. I feel bad supporting the whole system there, because it seems very exploitive. But I love them so much, and it's like
Hey, you
a
never know,
vice.
man. I'm sure you can be able to make some sort of impact with it. I mean, you could always supplement with grow lights and stuff, and you never
Right,
know with that. If you
a hybrid.
could supplement the winter with some grow lights, a high powered grow light, you could probably get fruit to produce on there.
Yeah.
I'm eventually, once I have everything dialed in, I want to plant one of these trees in the ground in the
Oh
greenhouse.
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Because right now they're all in
Yeah.
pots. I want to plant it in the ground so that way it can become its full tree self. Um, but I just need to make sure that it's going to survive first before I do all that
Mhm.
work.
All right. Sweet. Well,
That'll be so cool.
Lindy, did you have any more questions about the greenhouse
Um,
before we end it?
I did actually. Do you have any problems with mold in there, or is it pretty dry?
In the wintertime, with my rocket stove running every now and again, it dries it out pretty good.
Mhm.
Um, the walls are dirt, and so they do keep a good amount of humidity. But with the sun coming in and with the fan in the summertime and the ventilation, I haven't seen a problem with mold yet. I have a problem
Mhm.
with spiders because they love it in there. So
Yeah,
I
I'm
bet.
that's
sure.
my biggest problem. But and I've started to see a few pest problems. Like so the lemon had spider mites on it, and but nothing a little bit of neem oil or something can't fix really
Mhm.
easily. So it's just more about with pests. It's more about just staying on top of it. And other than that, I haven't had too many issues with that.
Mm.
Sweet.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, anyone listening right now, this is definitely something that's possible. It sounds like there's not really a straightforward way to build one yet, but maybe James will offer a class at some point on how to build a greenhouse or like a course to help
I
you
would
get.
say, at the end of the day, man, it's all about preparation. It's all about knowing your space, knowing how much sun is there, where the sun is at any given time. It's not like a regular greenhouse where you can just put it anywhere there's sun and it's all going to be good.
Yeah.
You need to be focused on the winter sun and where it is because the whole reason for using this greenhouse, normal greenhouses that are built at ground level, all the heat is just sucked out of them every single night. So it doesn't matter if it gets to 110 degrees in the wintertime in there. As soon as that sun goes away, it's going to immediately drop down to whatever the temperature is outside. And so you really need to know where the sun is. You need to know what your drainage and your soil type is because this won't work for some people. Like if you live in like Louisiana, it won't work because you are below the groundwater line, basically. You need to know where your groundwater is. It's like I'm lucky because we're on a slope and I know exactly where the ground level is because there's a creek that runs through our property. So that's the lowest point. And so as long as I'm above that by a significant amount, I'll never have to worry about the groundwater flooding when it rains. Now, the only problem is to worry about where the water that runs off the ground during a rainstorm comes. And so building berms, moving water like that, catching water, those are all ways to do that. So it's not even really about the greenhouse itself as much as the mechanisms that make it work. So
Right.
I would identify the mechanisms like that first, and then you can kind of build the greenhouse however you want. It doesn't have to be a specific design. I went with like a cottage style design that I thought looked cool in my mind. But I wasn't, I mean, the design was purely aesthetic, but the mechanisms were what I was really focused on as far as like, okay, this is where it needs to be facing, the direction it needs to be facing. You need to catch as much of the southern, the winter sun as possible, and it needs to have good water management. And other than that, there's things that you can adapt on the fly, so to speak, within those mechanisms. But it's really just about that. It's about just understanding the land, understanding the sun and the water, and in your general area, and then working from there. I'd say if you had a south facing slope, especially in the mountains where it's rocky, you might need an excavator to dig it, and I would highly recommend that. But that's probably the best place you could do it,
Yeah.
on the side of a slope, on a south facing slope. And I mean, especially if it's rocky, that's even better because the more rock that's in there, the more rock you can stack up on the back wall and on the side walls and everything.
For
It's just going to
insulation.
make more of a thermal battery. Yep.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
less insulation, it's more thermal battery. Every time the sun hits those rocks, they are like a double A battery. They're just absorbing that heat energy and they're displacing it over a longer period of time. Some people will use rain barrels that are painted black and they're full of water. And when the sun hits them, it heats up the water, and then that water dissipates over the course of several hours versus it just hitting plywood and most of it just bouncing off. But whatever is absorbed, there's not enough density in that material to absorb that heat energy. So it's all about energy exchange at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's
Mhm.
beautiful. Well, James, this has been absolute pleasure. You're a great podcast guest because of all the tangents,
Thank you.
Yeah.
honestly. And you're just a wealth of knowledge. I can tell after just sitting down on with you for this first podcast here, and really appreciate you coming on and sharing all your knowledge. For do you think we covered everything you wanted to say and get out there?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind if I plug my
No,
website and stuff
totally.
real
Yeah.
quick, I would
Definitely
love
plug
to.
your
Yeah.
website,
Yeah.
your courses and Instagram, and I'll put all that in the episode description too on YouTube and on all the podcast platforms.
Okay, awesome, man. Yeah, I teach public foraging classes and I have like wild food dinners and lunches that I do throughout the entire year. So if you're in Ohio or even in a state close by, come check me out. I do them all over Ohio. www.spicebushwoodcraft.com. My Instagram, where I do educational videos on everything from gardening to my greenhouse to native plants and all the kind of things we talked about today, at Spicebush Woodcraft on Instagram, and the same handle, I believe, on YouTube, Spicebush Woodcraft. I'll be doing a lot of YouTube videos toward the end of this year. And what else? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Totally.
Yeah.
It was
Absolutely.
It's
great
been
talking to you
fun.
guys too.
Yeah, let's do it again. I'd love to.
Yeah, for sure. Always down
Absolutely.
to talk about the things that I'm passionate about for sure. As you can probably tell.
Yes, us too.
Yeah.
All right. Bye bye.
Yeah.